Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Crusaders, the Epic History of the Wars for the Holy Lands by New York Times bestselling author Dan Jones. This is from chapter 1. It begins the book, The Count and the Imam. Count Roger of Sicily lifted his leg and farted. "By the truth of my religion," he exclaimed, "there is more use in that than in what you are here to say." His advisors stood chastened and a little perplexed. The Count before them was in his late 40s and salted to his bones with the experience of military campaigning in southern Italy and the islands of the central Mediterranean. As a young warrior, he had been described by one flatterer as tall and well-made, a most fluent speaker, shrewd in counsel, far-sighted in the planning of things to be done, cheerful and pleasant to everyone. In middle age, he had hardened somewhat and was not one to waste his words on fools. The plan the advisors had recommended had seemed like a good one, as courtiers' plans very often do, before they are shredded by the critiques of short-tempered potentates. Not far across the sea from Sicily, roughly 75 miles at the closest point, lay the remains of what had in ancient times been called Carthage, afterward the Roman province of Africa, and now in the 11th century, Ifriqiya. Its cities, including the capital Mahdia and on the coast, and Kairoun Island, where a vast mosque and school had for many generations been frequented by the greatest philosophers and natural scientists in North Africa, were under the shaky command of a crumbling dynasty of Berber Muslims known as the Zirids. The countryside was controlled by various Arab Bedouin tribes sent from Egypt to drive the Zirids out. Political stability was collapsing. Here lay warm and fertile farmlands. There sat prosperous port towns, all ripe for the taking. Roger's counselors thought so, and they had therefore recommended to their testy overlord the proposal of a cousin whom one source names only as Baldwin. This Baldwin had come into possession of a great army of Christian soldiers and was casting around for somewhere godless to conquer. He had asked Roger's blessing to come to Sicily and use it as a launch pad for an invasion of Irafiqua. "I shall be a neighbor of yours," he had explained, as though this were good news. But Roger of Sicily was not feeling neighborly. Irafiqua was undoubtedly ruled by various followers of Islam, he said, but those infidels happened to be sworn partners of the Sicilians in agreements that kept the peace and allowed for a rich exchange of goods in the island's markets and ports. The last thing he wanted, he ranted to his gathered minions, was a cousin imposing on his hospitality, waging a reckless war that would disrupt Sicilian trade if it was successful, and cost him a lot of money in military support if it failed. Irafiqua may indeed have been vulnerable, but if anyone was going to exploit that, it was going to be Roger himself. He had spent the last 2.5 decades, almost his entire adult life, carving out his rule in the region, and it would have been a limp end indeed if he were now to put it at risk in pursuit of some harebrained scheme cooked up by a kinsman who had never troubled the soil of the island with his sweat. If this Baldwin wanted to fight Muslims, said Roger, he would have to find a different part of the Mediterranean in which to go about his business. There were plenty of places he could name that would be preferable to Sicily's backyard. He summoned Baldwin's personal envoy to his presence and informed him of his decisions. If his master was really serious, he said, then the best way to proceed is to conquer Jerusalem. That is how it all began. Roger, Count of Sicily, was 11th century Europe's ultimate self-made man. He was born around the year 1040 as the youngest of 12 sons sired by a minor nobleman from Normandy called Tancred of Hauteville. Given the protocols of inheritance, being born even as a second son implied a lifelong burden of fortune hunting rather than easy inheritance. To have 11 brothers ahead of you was a disaster. But by the end of the century, the Normans had begun to conquer their way around Western Europe. They took command of Saxon England in 1066. At the same time, southern Italy fell under their gaze, and opportunities that may have seemed limited for younger sons within Normandy itself, but for anyone prepared to travel, opportunity abounded. As a young man, therefore, Roger had left his homeland in what is now northwest France and set out for territory that already called many of his kinsmen and countrymen the rich but unstable southern Italian regions of Calabria and Apulia. Toe and heel of the Italian boot, Calabria and Apulia were lands where resources were plentiful, authority was contested, and an ambitious young man with a yen for politics and warfare might make his name. Other Normans of the Hauteville clan had already found success here, fighting against the rival superpowers in the region, principally the Byzantine Greeks and Roman popes, both of whom regarded the Normans with suspicion bordering on alarm. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, you know, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, you know, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's kind of a gray day here in Portland on Thursday, but at least we have a day, right? Here we are. And boy, there's a lot that we're going to get to today. In the second hour of our program, our old friend Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, professor of economics, is going to drop by. We're going to talk about where we're at, where we're going, what it means, how we get through there, what we can do. In our third hour today, Don Siegelman, who was the last Democratic governor of Alabama, who outed on this program Karl Rove, and as a result of that got thrown into solitary confinement, is out of jail, has written a book. He's going to be here to talk about, you know, the crimes of Karl Rove and George W. Bush and the Republican Party in general, and also his concern that the coronavirus is ripping through our prison system. And so, you know, that's our second and third hour. In our first hour, first of all, I wanted to share with you my thoughts on Mad King Donald. But then secondly, I want to ask, and a tip of the hat to Don, who sent me a note suggesting this, and I think it's a great one. We were talking a couple of days ago about we're all grieving. You know, we're all mourning, essentially. And I was asking, what are you grieving? Well, today I'd like to go toward a little more positive note in just a few minutes and ask, where are you finding your optimism and your hope? I'm finding lots of places where I have optimism and hope. In particular, the fact that even Republicans now are talking, you know, they're talking like liberals. You know, okay, we've got to support people, we've got to, you know, et cetera. I think the era of neoliberalism has come to a close. This 40-year experiment with brutal, raw, unregulated capitalism has been revealed all around the world for what it is. But first, I wanted to kick off, you know, my rant for the day, which we posted over at buzzflash.com, and of course on our Facebook page, our Thom Hartmann Program Facebook page, and it's about Mad King Donald. He has gone full Joe Stalin in the last week or so. Joe Stalin, you'll recall, killed tens of millions of Russians. Trump and did it the same way. Trump is helping his friends and he's punishing his enemies. Not entirely the same way, but you understand what I'm saying. He's using, and Donald Trump is using the lives of millions of Americans to help his friends and punish his enemies. I mean, people are dying and will die because of this. Red State, Oklahoma told Trump that they needed 16,000 face shields. These are the large plastic, transparent plastic things that come down cover the entire face that, you know, typically you use for like orthopedic surgery and things where blood and bone are flying around. But, you know, usually they're not used. But these are really important right now. I mean, the latest report that had Poppy Harlow and Jim Sciutto just totally freaked out this morning on CNN, something that I think we've known for a while, but now has been like super confirmed, is that this virus is transmitted simply by breathing. You ever smelled somebody's bad breath? I think we've probably all had that experience. We smell not by radiation. If you're listening to my voice, you are listening to sound radiation. It's vibrations in the air. It's a form of radiation. It's not a particle, it's a wave. If you have your eyes open, if you can see, you are seeing light. That's not particles, those are waves. But when we smell something, we're smelling little tiny particles, little tiny pieces that float through the air. And so, if you can smell somebody's bad breath, what you're smelling are little particles that are being emitted by their lungs and by their mouth in the process of talking typically, or simply just breathing. Well, it turns out that those little tiny particles can be coronavirus particles. And just literally being in the air where somebody else was breathing, even minutes or hours in advance, depending on the circulation in your office or in your room, means that you can pick up the virus from them. And the biggest problem we have right now are these, uninfected super spreaders. These are uninfected but non-symptomatic people. So anyhow, Oklahoma, red state Oklahoma, said to Trump, we need 16,000 face shields that, as a primary layer to keep those particles from hitting people's eyes where they can cause an instant infection. And instead of the 16,000 red state Oklahoma asked for, they got 120,000. Joan McCarter is reporting this over at Daily Kos. Oklahoma got twice as many N95 masks. Red state Oklahoma got twice as many masks as they requested. Red state Florida is getting a third shipment from the feds. They got 100% of what Ron DeSantis asked for. Blue state California, they got 170 broken ventilators. New York State is still begging for supplies and equipment, while red state Kentucky received more than they actually asked for. Blue states Massachusetts and Illinois are getting a fraction of what they need and have asked for. And this is criminal, if not legally, certainly morally criminal. Adam Schiff has called for a 9/11-style commission to investigate Trump's delayed response to the coronavirus. He doesn't say Trump, but, why did we botch this? And, when they put it together, they need to investigate how Trump is deciding which states will live and which states will die. Because that's clearly what's going on here. And it's wrong. It's wrong, capital W-R-O-N-G. It is so wrong. I got my first coronavirus phishing email yesterday. I want to warn you about these things because I think it's pretty important. This one came from the SBA Loan Group, right? And it's got a link in it that goes to some URL that I've never seen before, and so I didn't even click it. But the Small Business Administration, Dear Tom, the Small Business Administration has issued the official application for the Paycheck Protection Program. We will assist you in complying with all the requirements to obtain this loan at no cost to you. Please complete the form below. After verification of the information and signing the DocuSign, you will receive an email with further instructions. You may need to be contacted by a phone call or email if additional information is needed regarding your application. These loans are done on a first-come, first-served basis. Therefore, the sooner we get your application, the better. Right. I guarantee you this is if I had clicked on this and filled out their form, they would have been asking for my bank account numbers, for my address, my social security numbers, all that stuff that you need to do identity theft or corporate, theft or emptying somebody or some company's bank account. Meanwhile, we're hearing now that Germany has all kinds of empty hospital beds. Now, why would that be? Well, it turns out, and Frank Jordans is writing about this for Associated Press News, AP News, late last year, scientists in Germany, right? This is last December. Late last year, scientists in Germany sprang into action to develop a test for the virus. They had one by mid-January. Coupled with Germany's large number of intensive care beds and its early social distancing measures, this could explain why one of the most interesting puzzles in the COVID-19 pandemic. Why are people with the virus in Germany currently dying at lower rates than in neighboring countries? Germany has 71,000 cases, only 775 deaths. In contrast, Italy has 106,000 infections and more than 12,000 deaths. Well, it turns out it's because Germany developed the test in January and deployed it. And they were testing tens of thousands and then hundreds of thousands of people before February began. No other country in Europe was doing this. This test, by the way, that was developed by this doctor in Berlin, that became the World Health Organization test. The Trump administration said, we don't need that here in the United States. We'll develop our own. We want things made in America. And now we discover, again, this was on CNN this morning, Quest Diagnostics, one of the two companies that Trump gave $1.5 million to and trotted out in front of the nation in one of their daily reality show segments, that company is behind over 100,000 tests are like in the queue. People are waiting in some cases as much as 12 days to find out if their test is positive. And many of the people who are waiting 12 days are healthcare workers. And some of them are dying. Others are working while they're presumed to be sick.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's amazing. I got to tell you about our experience picking up groceries yesterday, too. We'll be back. Mad King Donald. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Renee in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Renee, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. My question, in my experience, is the last stimulus check that we got, I remember when I had to file my taxes the following year that was taxable income. So I think everybody's under the impression that we're getting free money now. But I think in the end, we're going to end up paying taxes on this $1,200 if it gets to us.
Yeah. I'm guessing you're probably right, Renee. I don't know for sure, though. But
and Andrew Yang may have had a point. Andrew Yang may have had a point with having a guaranteed income of $1,000, particularly now. Yeah, I'm with you. And that's essentially what they're doing right now. And they need to be doing it on an ongoing basis. And with regard to taxing benefits, this started in 1983 when Ronald Reagan started putting a federal income tax on Social Security benefits. Prior to that, Social Security benefits had been without taxation, period. And Reagan put that tax on there. And since then, there have been a number of different benefit programs that have been taxed. You're absolutely correct. And even the $300 that George W. Bush sent out after 9/11. So I don't know about this particular $1,200, but I think that it's safe to assume, Renee, that you're correct and that we're going to have to pay taxes on it. Thanks a lot for the call. Philip in Baltimore. Hey, Philip, what's up?
Hi, I'm calling about what they did in Maryland. Maryland locked down everybody, and nobody goes to work except if you're an essential business. But I work for an envelope manufacturing business, and I've been there for 21 years, so I get 4 weeks vacation. I took 2 weeks because the company decides what's essential. So we make junk mail, basically. And I'm off. I have to go back to work in 2 weeks because I don't know if I can quit because I don't know if I get unemployment. But it's just wrong that the business decides, not the government. I just wanted you to know what's going on in Maryland.
Thank you, Philip. Each state is doing this in their own unique and different ways, and some states are designating what are critical industries and or vital or whatever. In fact, they use different words from state to state, and other states are just saying, well, here's our phrase. Do you fit into this or not? Apparently, Baltimore is one, or Maryland is one of them. That's unfortunate. Is Larry Hogan your governor?
Yes, he is.
Right?
Actually,
and he's a Republican, right?
Yeah, but he's actually not. I didn't vote for him. I voted for Ben.
He's been pretty good.
For Republican, he's really good. Actually, he's as liberal as I think Biden is. But in Maryland, you have to be because there are no Republicans in Maryland except for on the Eastern Shore and in the mountains. And the only reason he got elected was because it's an off-year election. They elect the governor on the off year, and the Maryland Democratic Party does virtually nothing. I mean, no advertising at all. Yeah,
and he ran against Ben Jealous, didn't he? The former NAACP
and
president?
The Democratic Party did not come out and do anything for Ben Jealous.
That's unfortunate.
I mean, if Barack Obama would have come and done a speech in Baltimore then Jealous would have won easily.
Yeah.
But they didn't do anything.
Yeah. Okay, Philip, thanks. Thanks for the report from Maryland. It's good to know. I appreciate it. Fascinating stuff. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back with more of your calls. And the news of the day, I've got just a huge pile of news to share with you over the next 3 hours. I'm trying to space this stuff out because there's so much of it over the entire program. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We have a special video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was one fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's as I said, it's available over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for a national health care system. Welcome back. As I mentioned, I've got this huge pile of news here for the day, and I'm just kind of rationing it out over the next 3 hours of the program. But where I want to start is I've been talking, I spoke briefly, I suppose, about the criminality of the Trump administration and how they're basically letting people in blue states die so that they can send personal protective equipment and ventilators and things to red states. And we now have, a confirmation of this from an unknown source inside the White House. Meanwhile, we're seeing, I think, frankly, at least morally criminal behavior on the part of some of our hospitals. This is amazing. Nick Kristof in today's New York Times, or yesterday's New York Times, the article is titled, "I do fear for my staff," a doctor said. He lost his job. That's the headline. And Nick Kristof points out at least 61 doctors and nurses have died from the coronavirus in Italy so far. In New York City alone, 2 nurses have died. This is in the United States. In New York City alone, 2 nurses have died and more than 200 healthcare workers are reported sick at one hospital. And all this is because we don't have adequate personal protective equipment. In Bellingham, Washington, an ER doctor, a fellow by the name of Ming Lin, had worked for 17 years at Peace Health St. Joseph Medical Center. 17 years. This emergency doctor has worked there. He went on news and said he went on the news and he was interviewed by the TV station and he said, "I'm concerned we don't have enough personal protective equipment." And Charles Prosper, the CEO of the hospital network, who's refusing to take Nick Kristof's call, "Charles, you're a friggin' coward." Charles Prosper, the CEO of the hospital network, would not even take a call from a reporter. The board of directors needs to fire this ass. Anyhow, he fired this ER physician. He fired him because he went on TV and said, "I don't have enough PPE." I don't know how to reach the Peace Health board of directors, but if I knew a way to get to that board of directors and suggest that they fire Charles Prosper, the CEO of the hospital network, I would do so. If you know how, maybe you can call in and let me know. In New York City, Dr. Anna Ringswelsky, an ER physician, brought her own PPE. She works at the Weill Cornell Medical Center. The hospital refused to allow her to wear it and sent her home. Her future is unclear. In Chicago, a nurse, Lori Mazurkiewski, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her name, but anyhow, Lori warned colleagues that standard face masks distributed by the hospital were not safe. She brought in her own higher grade N95 mask, and she was fired by Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Does anybody know who the CEO of Northwestern Memorial Hospital is? This is obscene. In Texas, an anesthesiologist, Dr. Henry Nissis, who was in effect suspended without pay. I'm reading from Nick Kristoff's piece in yesterday's New York Times. Was suspended without pay because he wore a mask in public places in the hospital. Nick Kristoff says it's baffling that the richest country in the history of the world fails so abysmally at protecting its health workers, especially when it had 2 months lead time. And for hospitals to now retaliate, this is both unconscionable and idiotic. And obscene. Meanwhile, Senator Bernie Sanders is demanding that postal workers have access to sanitation products and personal protective equipment. He cited a report from ProPublica earlier this month that said that the Postal Service was pressuring its workers to keep delivering the mail even when they have symptoms of the illness, and that they had little to no access to hand sanitizers. Over 200 U.S. Postal Service workers have tested positive. That's as of Tuesday. That's 3 times as many as the previous week. Now, that's out of 630,000 workers, but still. The U.S. Postal Service told Huffington Post, though, that they are now starting to make masks and gloves and surgical masks available to all employees. And also that they said they have a coronavirus-related paid leave for workers to use for childcare if they come into contact with someone with COVID-19. So maybe, Bernie is starting to shake things up. Meanwhile, we're discovering that on February 3rd, now get into your Wayback Machine, February 3rd, the first confirmed death or the first confirmed case in the United States and South Korea was January 20th or January 19th. February 3rd, about a week and a half later, the U.S. Army warned Donald Trump in an unclassified briefing on February 3rd that 150,000 Americans could die because of COVID-19. This is the Army. They gave this, this came out of U.S. Northern Command, NORTHCOM, and it came 2 days after Defense Secretary Mark Esper ordered prudent planning for a military response to COVID-19. So the Army, Secretary of the Army asks for it, the Army provides it. They say 150,000 people are going to die if you don't do something immediately. And what did Trump do? Nothing. This is in February. It's now April. We still don't have a nationwide shutdown. This was in February. February 3rd, in fact, almost the end of January. Trump knew, Trump lied, Americans died.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's astonishing. Anyhow, pick up your calls. Where are you finding optimism now? Where are you finding hope? Stick around to do it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is ADHD, A Hunter in a Farmer's World by Thom Hartmann. This is from Chapter 3, Hunters in Our Schools and Offices, The Origin of ADHD. Our book today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a
homophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on the birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism.
Peter May Barduk has a warning to pandemic profiteers, and chief Washington analyst with the DC radio company, Victoria Jones, drops by to talk about COVID-19, UK, Boris v. Trump, and others. Stay tuned. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Like pretty much everybody else in the media here, broadcasting from home, Thom Hartmann here with you. Over on Twitter, I shared with you the letter, the scam letter, the phishing letter that I got, where a company, what I'm sure it was probably, a Nigerian scam or something out of India or the Philippines. Is where a lot of these things originate, although some of them are coming right out of the United States itself. Said, we will help you apply for a business loan. Just click this link, all right? And whether I'm going to get a virus when I click on the link, or whether I'm going to simply be asked to provide them with all my bank account information. Well, Mr. Resistance Stevie says, Tom, I got a similar scam email, but claiming they would file my Social Security claim for me if I would just send them my Social Security number and phone number. And there was some obscure URL, says Stevie. Please be careful and don't open a strange email. Don't send Social Security numbers or phone numbers to strangers. Absolutely. There is going to be an absolute screaming, flaming avalanche of these kind of scams, and probably some of them are going to take place on the telephone as well. Be wary. The government does not contact you and say, we'll send you money. Private companies don't contact you and say, we'll send you money. Don't believe it. James Silverstone says, Massachusetts made a deal with China for some I saw this story this morning in the Financial Times. With China for some masks. 1 million masks were flown on the New England Patriots jet. Robert Kraft coordinated that. They're giving 300,000 of them to New York. This is something that the federal government should be doing, as James points out. Yes, absolutely. Meanwhile, Lori Lightfoot, the new mayor of Chicago, well, new last year, the mayor of Chicago, made an announcement, a sad announcement this morning. The first police officer in Chicago has died from COVID-19. It's just remarkable what is going on. Oh, and Sean found for me the board of directors of Peace Health. Peace Health is the hospital that fired in Bellingham, Washington, fired ER Dr. Ming Lin, Peace Health St. Joseph Medical Center, where this ER doctor had worked for 17 years because he went on TV and said we need more equipment. Charles Prosper is the cowardly CEO of this organization. Turns out they're headquartered right across the river from me in Vancouver, where we have a radio station and we're on the air. So if you know, I've got a list of the board of directors here. If you know any of these people, don't harass them or anything. Don't go out of your way to hassle them. But if you happen to know them, or you know an easy way to reach out to them, it's peacehealth.org/board-of/directors. peacehealth.org/board-of-directors. And the board of directors, I'll just give their names. If you know them, you can reach out to them. Please be respectful and just say it's time to fire Charles Prosper, the guy who was in charge of the organization that fired the doctor. Get these asses out of here. Get these. I'm trying so hard not to use language that's going to get me knocked off the radio. I'm so fried about this. So here are the board of directors of Peace Health. Tim Ackman, who's with Alaska Airlines. The chair of the board is a fellow by the name of Carl with a K, Carrier with a C. Charlotte Davenport is on the board. Diane Hollingshead, who's a retired community volunteer. In fact, quite a few of these people are like basically volunteers. They're good people trying to do good things. So again, if you contact them, be very nice. Dan Hollingshead, Lee Kearney, Donna King, Kevin Murphy, who's out of Denver actually, Andrea Nenzel, who's out of Vancouver, Kathleen Pruitt out of Seattle, Todd Strumwasser, MD, out of San Francisco, and Rick Wollenberg, who's out of Longview, Washington. So if you know any of those folks and you have any pull with them and you can help them get Charles Prosper, this weasel CEO of the company who refuses to talk to Nick Kristof, a journalist for the New York Times, get this guy fired, let me know about it. I am over this. Hospitals crapping on their doctors and their nurses and their physician's assistants and their orderlies and their janitor. I'm over it. The hospitals had months to prepare for this, just like the federal government had months to prepare for this. This is you know, these for-profit, and some of them are non-for-profit. I don't know about Peace Health. I'm assuming it's a non-profit, the way that its board is constructed. But you know, these organizations have no damn business firing doctors and nurses who speak out. It is wrong. It is a crime. We need to fight back. We need to raise absolute holy hell. There needs to be some accountability. These doctors and nurses are and orderlies and respiratory techs and I mean, you know, you fill in the blanks. The people right down to the janitors. These people who are every day walking into a hospital are probably facing a higher chance of dying than I did back in the 60s when the draft was going on. You know, only 51,000 Americans died in Vietnam. Well, obviously, I think only 1 million went to Vietnam, so maybe it's not a good comparison. But you get my point. I mean, the risk. These people are literally risking their lives to be there for you and me, and then they get these damn managers and CEOs. And people running these hospitals going, oh, we can't have it look like we're not doing our job. We will fire them. Screw you, Charles Prosper. Anyhow, tell us what you really think, Tom. All right. Mike, Mike, I don't have a city for you. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Miami, Florida.
Okay. What's up?
Yeah, so I've called before. I'm in the military, 22 years now. Kind of overheard you mention February 3rd. We were getting briefings for this stuff way prior to that. And I will say, I mean, I've been out of the office probably about a month now. Just came in today to switch out the laptop, that kind of thing. So we've been getting those briefings, and it's crazy the difference in places. So I've had to let my neighbors know what they were telling us because no one was telling them anything. And Miami, Florida in itself just they just passed down information that we're going to go into sort of like a lockdown, right? Like it's not even like a full lockdown, and it's still churches is not exempt, you know? So
yeah, Ron DeSantis exempted churches, didn't he, Mike?
He exempted.
This is nuts.
Exempted churches. The worst. I mean, one of the worst things you could probably do, and no one could.
Yes,
really
let's kill people who are religious.
You know, it's nuts. But we've been getting this information.
Maybe Ron DeSantis hates Christians, Mike. Maybe he just hates Christians.
Right? You know, it's unbelievable, man. But it's people are not getting the right.
So you're saying, let me just be very clear about this, Mike. I was sharing this reporting that on February 3rd, the Army notified the Trump administration that over 100,000 Americans could die from this coronavirus if the Trump administration didn't do something. February 3rd, and throughout February and March, and you know, well, here we go. On February 10th, Donald Trump said it'll go away in April. We're in great shape. On February 26th, he said within a couple of days it'll be close to zero. On February 27th, he said it's going to disappear like a miracle. On February 28th, he said it's the Democrats' new hoax. On March 4th, he said people can recover by going to work. On March 6th, he said anyone wants a test, they can get a test. They're perfect. On March 7th, he went golfing. On March 8th, he went golfing. On March 13th, he said, I don't take any responsibility at all. And you're saying way back on February, and I'm saying way back on February 3rd, the military was saying hundreds of thousands of people are going to die. And you're saying you're in the military and you were getting those briefings before February 3rd?
We were getting the briefings before February 3rd. And then once March hit, twice a week, we will have our surgeons come up and talk to the whole command, let us know exactly what was going on, where they were at test-wise, where the most information they had about it. So basically, we went into this thing by the 15th of March, we went down to pretty much half. And then shortly after that, the directive came down and basically, I wouldn't say shut us down, but basically said, all right, there's no interstate travel. There's definitely no out of country travel. Everybody coming out of the country into the country is going straight into 14 days quarantine. Like they gave us from top to bottom, and So I would go home, share some of this info with my neighbors, and they're looking at me like I was crazy. So it
because they're watching Fox News and listening to Trump.
And for the most part, I wouldn't even say that. They're just working, going about their lives, and just not getting that information. And that's been the biggest part. As far as optimism, I kind of look at my kids, the neighbors, and then kind of try to share some of the information that we've been getting. The neighborhood I live, there's some delivery people, and we kind of been joking about how they're delivering more things than ever before, and seeing like their reactions to people getting the packages and washing them outside, that kind of thing. And they're just looking at them like, well, if you're doing that, what is UPS doing for me?
Right.
So,
yeah, interesting. Well, the UPS drivers too. I mean, yeah. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks so much for the information. And I mean, our FedEx and UPS drivers and delivery people, they're on the front lines too. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Picking up your phone calls right after this. Stick around. In the next hour, we're going to get into Trump is still insisting governors kiss his ass. They should be kicking it, actually. And welcome back. Tim in Loa, Oregon. Hey, Tim. Thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Yeah, it's amazing. A lot of people don't really realize it because, well, that's a whole other story. But virtually every day these White House briefings, and all they are is campaign speeches for
Yep.
Trump. He's interjecting all this stuff about the impeachment and so forth. I'm wondering when he's going to start throwing Hunter Biden and Monica Lewinsky and Hillary Clinton into that stuff. You see what I mean? That's how pathetic this is getting. And the thing is, you're talking about Fox News. If Sean Hannity tonight went on and said the stock market's fine, the coronavirus is a hoax, you know how many millions of people in this country would believe that guy? That's the scary
majority
part,
of the Fox News watchers. It's a cult. I mean, it's just like Jim Jones said, drink the Kool-Aid. They drank the Kool-Aid.
Exactly, yeah. And the thing is, even like CNN and MSNBC are giving him a little bit of credit for finally waking up. Well, if you hold a gun to the head of a lunatic, they're going to even realize there's a problem. You see what I mean? So that's what's happening. It's scary, and people are just misinformed and uninformed is what it amounts to. And and about the only good thing you can say about what's happening is if it gets to the point where it really gets out of hand, we're only going to have one solution, and that's to be logical. Otherwise, we're done, basically,
Yeah, I'm with you. Tim, I got to move along, but thank you for the call.
All right.
It's spot on. Kat in Vashon, Washington. Hey, Kat, what's up?
Yeah, hi. First of all, yesterday, the Prozac Nation, I didn't finish listening, but that was written by Elizabeth Wurtzel.
You're right. It was talking back to Prozac that Peter Bregan wrote. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and she actually, sorry, I'm nervous. She actually died just this January 7th.
Oh, my. Okay.
At 52 of metastatic breast cancer.
Oh, my.
And she had the BRCA2 genetic mutation that she didn't realize. You were talking about how these mutations can help you in certain, this mutation, I have it too. And so I was very interested in this. It helped people against diseases of like 1,000 years ago. So, interesting stuff.
So
but
you
anyway,
called to say what? We're running out of time here.
Okay, sorry. People in my situation with terminal illness, I mean, for me, this is the last 4 to 6 months of my life, and I had it pretty planned out, and I was really happy with it, spending time with loved ones, etc. And, of course, that's not happening. But if we could, if my family could get the testing for the antibodies, they could come and help me, but they can't get the test. So people are. I know I'm a small percentage of what everyone's facing, but it just goes to show how this affect. It's such a broadcast effect for so many.
And it's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, people in my situation, I belong to a small Facebook group, and we've pretty much all decided, we're not going to survive the virus. We don't want to take ventilators from people who have a better chance. But we can't even have our families.
I'm so sorry. My best friend's wife is dying of terminal cancer, and they're having a terrible problem just getting her treatment. Kat, I'm so sorry to hear your situation. I hope you're... Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. We have a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Anyhow, you can check out all the details of it in our little video over at ThomHartmann.com. And thanks again for supporting the program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And we just had the saddest call from Kat in Vashon, Washington, talking about how she's got 4 or 5 months to live, and she had it planned out to be with family and friends, and now people can't visit her. She can't, I guess, FaceTime and Skype, but people can't visit. And I mentioned my best friend for 40, 50 years now lives in New York City, and his wife has cancer, and it's throughout her body. And in fact, she was on the liver transplant list before that. And, they're having a real hard time getting any kind of medical services because the hospitals in New York are just shut down. It's got to be a terrifying thing. Janet in Mount Vernon, Washington. Hey, Janet, what's up? Thanks for listening.
Hi, Tom. That call from Kat, it was truly, I mean, it's like awful. That is horrible. This whole situation is so bizarre, and you wonder, you get to the point where you say, is this some sort of a plan that this government has, or whatever they're doing to us? On Monday, the Seattle Times ran an excellent article about Dr. Lin, and I'm so glad you were covering this story. I've been meaning to call in all week. Dr. Lin actually works for a group called Team Health. He's not an employee of Peace Health. He's actually a contract doctor.
Oh, really?
And this is where it gets really interesting.
So the Peace Health Hospital is contracting out with a private
yes, Team Health. This is where, yes, and it gets very interesting because Team Health was acquired by the Blackstone Group, which is a private equity firm, in 2016 for $6 billion.
So who gave the order to fire Dr. Lin? Because you would assume that it would be the hospital, even though they're running their payroll through a third party.
Well, it just said, all along they said, well, we didn't fire him, and maybe they have, and I just haven't heard that recent news. But it says doctors lending the article said that doctors lending their name to aid and abet corporate practices of medicine, and this is what you get. Dr. Lin is causing a problem by publicly raising these safety concerns and asked the physician owner to handle him. So I suspect it was actually this team health that may be at the bottom of this. And Tom, this has not, to the best of my knowledge, been covered like on, watching mainstream television. It's pathetic because this leads to that whole question of, who actually owns our so-called healthcare delivery system. And I'm truly grateful for the public service that you've been doing. My husband and I recently changed our Medicare from a Medicare Advantage to straight Medicare because of listening to your show. These hospitals, this is a private equity firm. They're there to make money.
Yeah,
and
exclusively.
Exclusively. So this is the true, and you wonder, well, is it somebody on Blackstone that's also on the board of CBS or ABC or Viacom, any one of these? Why aren't they covering this story? No one is covering it. This is truly a tragedy, and thank you.
Yeah, Janet, I was going to say, when you add in, and I did a rant about this either yesterday or the day before, about how these hospitals have contracted with third-party billing. I told the story back, we had a company years ago, and we tried leasing our own employees, and it was a small disaster, and we got ripped off badly by the leasing company. But as the employer, and my employees did too. They all thought they had 401ks, and when this leasing company went away, so did their 401ks, which was bizarre. But this is just like so wrong, and frankly, I think my advice to contact the hospital board still stands and tell them to fire the damn leasing company, employee leasing company, and hire their own damn employees. This is just, these kinds of practices are just criminal. Janet, I got to move on. You want to put a punctuation mark on that?
Just a real quick, I suspect this is going on all over, not just doctors,
Yes.
all kinds of, different practices that they're buying up, these private equity firms. That's where the devil is in the details. So thank you so much for covering this.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. Thanks for listening to SiriusXM. Also listening to SiriusXM, Charles in Miami. Hey, Charles, you have found a moment or a point for optimism?
Well, something like that, but I just wanted to say the cat, if you don't mind, probably it may be a good thing that you don't get visitors. Someone could make you sick unknowingly and shorten your life. But I think he was talking yesterday about those equity firms, and it may have been nursing staff or hospital staff that you may be saying that they got their contracts. But I wanted to say, hopefully this will be the end of neoliberalism, and also the red taker states. These states that I live in a taker state. I live in a welfare state. It's like a one-horse town where, they actually had to bring in those spring breakers because they had to fill them up with the beaches and prop up this smoke and mirror greatest economy that these Republicans are trying to run past. Because if it was a great economy, we wouldn't be in this so quick a disaster. And there's no real manufacturing here, We just sell oranges and
Charles, I got to run, but I got to run. Thank you. Your point was very well made. Coming up next, Professor Richard Wolff is going to give us his assessment of the economy and where it's going and what we can do about it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hello, I'm Casey Hobbs.
We say fight back!
We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I used a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. War was Harriet Tubman. The book, Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the phone with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, author of numerous books, his most recent Understanding Socialism. His website's democracyatwork.info and rdwolff with 2fs.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, P-R-O-F, as in Professor Wolff, W-O-L-F-F. Professor Wolff, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
I am very curious to hear your thoughts on where we're at. I think last week when we talked, or maybe it was even the week before that, I had said to a congressman on this program after the first stimulus was passed, I said it's going to take at least $10 trillion to get us out of this hole, or to get us through the year. We're going to have to basically make up for an economy that's not running. We have now 10 million people out of work. Are people's jobs going to be there when they go back? What's America going to look like economically a year from now? And banks are warning that Trump's small business loan program is headed for a total disaster. Your thoughts on these things, sir?
Well, I think that the truth of it is nobody knows, and I'm not going to get myself into difficulty with you and your listeners by pretending that I could answer that question. There are simply too many variables, number one, and too much is happening too quickly for us to understand. I mean, when I saw the numbers this week of the increase in people applying for unemployment, where we're losing, 1 million people a day or some astronomical number of people basically losing their jobs, losing their incomes, you have to shake your head in disbelief. In a few short weeks, we have gone from an economy that the president of our country referred to as the greatest in the world to an economy that looks to us now, and I mean this seriously, to be entering into a depression, the likes of which we've only seen once before, namely in the 1930s. A literal, complete breakdown in which millions of people have no job, in which vast portions of our business community have effectively stopped functioning, and in which the next steps are so scary and so unknown that everyone is in a limbo of sorts, with the only extra weird part of it being that we're isolated in our little living situations, being told that it's life-threatening to go outside. I mean, under such circumstances, making predictions is very difficult. I can tell you that the behavior of the Federal Reserve, the money that they've been pumping in, records amounts, the interest rates that have been low for 15 years, now even lower, have totally failed. I mean, let's be real clear. 2 weeks ago, the Federal Reserve dropped interest rates by 0.5 point. Everybody said, wow, it had no positive effect that anyone can discern. A week later, they cut the interest rate, that time by 1%. Everyone said, wow, twice, and it was, again, a total failure. The only thing you can say, and even that without certainty, is that it would have been even worse, perhaps, if they hadn't done it, but that's not much comfort. And now we see this $2 trillion fiscal program of stimulus, and all I can do as an economist and a historian is shake my head and repeat the old phrase, way too little, way too late. Let's remember, if the parallel is the Great Depression, which it is, we can see that with the unemployment numbers already, then let's compare giving $1,200 to every taxpayer, maybe $500 to their kids, and maybe an extra few hundred to the unemployment check, versus what was done in the 1930s. Roosevelt begins by creating the Social Security system, which we had never had. He declares, at a time when the government is much more in trouble revenue-wise than it is today, and we have much more unemployment even than we have today, he declares the Social Security system is going to give every American 65 years of age or older a check every month for the rest of their lives, rather than a one-time check for $1,200. I mean, you're talking an elephant versus a flea. But that's not all. You know, a few months later, he declares the unemployment compensation system. Everybody who's out of work, and in those days it was tens of millions, is now going to get a check from the federal government every week for a year or longer, dwarfing by many times, a multiple of many times, $1,200 per voter. And finally, the public employment program from 1934 to 41, 15 million Americans were given a federal job, an important job, doing all kinds of important things, so that unemployed people would have a job, would have income, would have the self-esteem that goes with it, would be able to make their mortgage payments to hold on to their home. None of that is being done now. People are being told, go do nothing. No government program for them to be useful to one another, no planning for anything. I mean, the level of failure of this system to either prepare for or cope with this kind of a disaster, it would make you think, gee, this is something new. Nobody could prepare for it. But that's the opposite of the truth. We had a pandemic like this in 1918, worse than this one, at least it looks that way. We know exactly how it works and what needs to be done. A few years ago, we had SARS, we had MERS, we had Ebola. I mean, we know what this is. We know that the spread of the disease is. There is no excuse for the level of breakdown. And what you're seeing is the cascade of consequences when the system has been focused on private profit maximization instead of meeting the needs of a society, which in any rational way would include preparing for something as well known as viral pandemics.
I think we have about 2 minutes to a hard break here. In 1929, the stock market crash in and of itself didn't cause the depression, correct me if I'm wrong, but rather everybody was in debt. There were all these people who owned stocks on margin. And as the stock market went down, those margin calls got hit and people had to, they had to pay back the debts and they couldn't do it. And that's really what crashed the system. We have massive debt in the United States right now. That bubble has not yet started to burst, has it? And do you expect it to?
Yes. I mean, we are much more indebted than we were in 1929. But the irony there, Tom, I have to get this out. The irony is the reason corporations have greater debt now than at any time in American history is that we solved the crash, the dot-com crash in 2000, and then the subprime mortgage crash in 2008-9 by lowering interest rates, making it an invitation with all that money and the low interest rates for every corporation, no matter what the problem it had in its business, to solve it by getting essentially free money and going into levels of debt that are now about to burst because the underlying economy cannot generate the profits out of which that debt was supposed to be repaid. And the government acts as though this catastrophe is somehow not going to happen. That's a mistake.
Right.
And it makes
Are you expecting a large defaults on corporate bonds now?
Well, I think what the government is going to do is basically either allow that to happen, which would be catastrophic, or simply suspend all repayment of credit and have the government finally step in and say what has already been the truth. We are now the economy. The government guarantees everything. Private capitalism has collapsed. And we'll figure out what we do from here.
Wow. I understand the Fed is buying corporate bonds right now, too.
Yep. That's the first step.
Yeah, amazing. Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info, rdwolff.com. Thank you, Professor. Thanks for dropping by today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom.
Always great talking with you. I always learn something. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and then your calls right after this. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're going to dig back into the news here in just a minute, and then we'll be picking up your phone calls. Stick around. And welcome back. There we go. Javon in Los Angeles. Hey, Javon, what's up?
What's up, Professor? Good to hear from you. Blessings, blessings, blessings to you and yours, and I hope that your workers and your family and friends are staying safe during this time crisis. Yeah, man, I want to jump right into it, honestly. And I'm sorry to hear about Kate. Blessings, Kate. And you hear about that all over the news that's happening right now. Families that come in, doctors that come in, and they can't touch and hug their kids because, they have to shower and trash their clothes and all that. And it's just a heartbreaking thing all around. However, we are still in an election year, and people have to remember that. And a big part of this problem that we have in America is because of our administration. And we should definitely we have to somehow come up with some strategies to keep people positive for voting somehow, and knowing that this is an election year, and getting people somehow to take their mailing and ballot serious, and any extensions take it serious, and overall just curious about strategy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm with you, and the plan that Ron Wyden and Earl Blumenauer have put forward in the Senate and the House respectively to give millions of dollars, $500 million, and it may actually cost $2 billion, but to give a lot of money to the states so that they can print ballots, absentee ballots, and these 17 states where you've got to have a doctor's slip in order to get an absentee ballot, blow that out and just make nationwide, voting by mail possible. We now have both the president and Republican elected officials now. I'm going to get into this story a little later on in the show. Have come out and said if that happens, if everybody is allowed to vote by mail, there will be no Republicans left, and which would be a really good outcome for the country.
That's the idea, right?
They're going to fight this. They're going to the mattresses, Javon. They're saying no way. We're not going to let people vote. They have never been in favor of people voting.
Yeah, man. It's a sad thing to hear that we Americans, colonial elements, put down places like Venezuela that has it right. Right. Yeah. That has it right. We put them down and we tell them, we shun them, and we are the most powerful country in the world, and so on and so forth. And yet, the democracy is on point. right? And we sidetrack them with people like that white, whoever that guy is. I can't think of his name against Maduro. Who I'm not a fan of either. But it's just like this pathetic thing, and yet we don't have our voting process is too the trash. I'm being nice as much as possible on radio, but it's hard. So now I called today just to say, well, what are other strategies people can be doing that we should be thinking about and keeping people.
I think people need to be calling if they live in one of those states that doesn't have really, really easy vote by mail, they need to be calling their governors, they need to call their state representative, they need to call their state senator, and they need to be raising hell at the local level on this stuff. And then they need to be calling their member of the House of Representatives and both of their senators. And these are all red states. So they just, plus New York State, which, the legislature in New York State has been effectively run by the Republicans for a long, long time. Because there's some Democrats who toss in with them. But people need to get on this, Javon. You raised a really, really important point. Thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. And thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we're seeing Trump's Stalin complex played out, writ large. Oklahoma asked for 16,000 face shields, got 120,000. I mentioned this in the first hour. They had received 84,000 N95 masks, twice what they asked for. And Ron DeSantis down in Florida, these red state governors are getting everything that they want. Kentucky got more than it requested. Illinois, Massachusetts, no, not so much, forget it. And California only got 170 broken ventilators. New York asked for 30,000 ventilators. They got 4,000. And they're being outbid by FEMA in the private market. Well, on top of that now, Donald Trump, they've developed this new rapid test kit that gives you results in 15 minutes. And it involves a piece of machinery. You take the swab and you put it in a reagent in a little solution, and then you stick it inside the machine and you push a button, and the machine in 15 minutes tells you what's going on. Donald Trump wants to send these exclusively to the red states, to the rural areas of America. Honest to God, this is in today's Washington Post. They want to send them to, quote, rural states and parts of the South. This is a quoting from the Washington Post this morning. While some White House officials want to ship many of the tests, which are approved Friday and can deliver results in 5 to 13 minutes, to areas where there are fewer cases, such as rural states and parts of the South. Gretchen Whitmer, the Democratic governor of Michigan, is begging for these things. Nope, you can't have them. And delays in test readings, it can take 13 days to get a test result back because these private for-profit corporations that Donald Trump and Jared Kushner have contracted with, are overwhelmed. And surprise, surprise. And as a result, first responders and healthcare workers are, they themselves don't know if they're sick or if they're contagious. And they don't know if the people around them are sick or contagious. And then on Tuesday at the White House Coronavirus Task Force meeting, Mike Pence said, let's send these rapid test machines to areas where there are very few cases. In other words, let's send them out to the red states. Let's send them to North Dakota and South Dakota and Idaho and Utah. He says, we need to figure out the spread in places where we don't quite understand it now. This is a quote from the meeting, apparently from Mike Pence. Let's send them to the South and low-density areas. Meanwhile, Michigan residents are sending their own videos holding up send kits signs. Donald Trump is refusing to use the Defense Production Act to force manufacturers to make masks and things like that. Not really force, because once the federal government tells a manufacturer that they have to make something, the federal government then has to pay them, and at a fair market price. But Trump is refusing to do it, and why is that? Well, according to the New York Times, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has persuaded Jared Kushner that this is a bad idea because it's interference in the free market. And Jared Kushner is in charge of this stuff, and he's advising Donald Trump. Yes, it is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And Google is still a member of the Chamber of Commerce. Google, by the way, has said we will not run advertisements that refer to the coronavirus. But we will run public service announcements from the federal government. So the Trump administration is cranking out public service announcements about, here's all the wonderful stuff we're doing in the coronavirus epidemic. And meanwhile, when the Democrats are trying to run ads on YouTube, which is owned by Google, they're trying to run ads saying Donald Trump has failed. YouTube is saying, no, we won't accept those ads. Because Google is saying, now, to their credit, Google is trying to avoid ads by scam artists and hustlers and people selling fake cures, and I congratulate them for that. But in politics, they really need to suspend this policy. Meanwhile, Brian Kemp, the guy who stole the election from Stacey Abrams by refusing to register 50,000 African-American, 55,000, he won by 51,000 votes, refusing to register 55,000 African-American votes and throwing almost 500,000 registered voters off the voting rolls, mostly in black areas, mostly in suburban Atlanta, or urban Atlanta and other areas of Georgia where there were large black populations. Brian Kemp yesterday said, we didn't know until the last 24 hours that you can spread this disease by simply breathing on someone. We didn't know that. Oh my God. Right. February 24th was the first time that this appeared in print in a scientific publication in the United States and made it into the mainstream press. That was, a month and a half ago. And, the speculation was back in December and January. He's claiming that he procrastinated on shutting down the state of Georgia because he just didn't know. Brian Kemp, he's just too stupid. He just doesn't watch the news or pay attention to anything except Fox News. And of course, if you only watch Fox News, you really are stupid. And that's what's happened. I mean, you end up stupid. You end up uninformed. I shouldn't say stupid. I should say uninformed. But he says, oh, this is a game changer. We're going to shut down the state of Georgia. Right. Now, this is not new. Meanwhile, U.S. manufacturers, right up until March 17th, the day that 37 states closed their public schools, right up until March 17th, U.S. manufacturers were shipping large quantities of respirators, ventilators, and protective medical equipment to Germany, Belgium, and Japan. And they are still selling them. These middlemen that are holding these auctions where the states are having to compete against each other and then FEMA comes in and outbids them, well, it turns out foreign governments are bidding for these things. There are millions of N95 respirators in warehouses across the United States. Many of them are about to be shipped overseas because Donald Trump will not invoke the Defense Production Act and will not say, no, you may not sell these to foreign governments. As a result, people are dying in the United States, in particular our frontline healthcare providers. They are in deep trouble. This is just criminal. And what's Donald Trump doing today? Well, actually, I guess it's tomorrow. He's going to be meeting with oil billionaires. They're preparing to rob us blind. President Donald Trump on Friday is reportedly set to hold an in-person White House meeting with top executives from ExxonMobil, Chevron, Continental Resources, Occidental Petroleum, Devon Energy, Energy Transfer, Phillips 66. They want to bail out.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Isn't that special? We'll be back with your calls right after this.
This.
We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State where the police officers hogtied this guy arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked just, he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war? How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred? How to win it, if such a thing is even possible. This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't, that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb, by and large, saying that Hispanics are changing our culture. Really? This is European culture. I mean, you know, the Mayans and Aztecs got replaced by the Spaniards, remember? They're mostly Catholic. I don't see the cultural difference here, but Fox sure does. And also pointing out that Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, calls out Rupert Murdoch and says, you know, he's, quote, a cancer on Australian democracy. Well, apparently a cancer on American democracy as well. So you can check out this new video over at thomhartmann.com. It's just available to people who are, you know, members of, supporters of our program. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's on your mind today?
Tom, a long time, sir. Two things, both of which may sound strange, but the first
Nicholas, I don't know why, but your phone is so muffled. I literally cannot understand a word you're saying. I'm gonna put you on hold and let you work it out with Joyce, because even when you just replied to me, it sounded all muffled. And I'll pick up a few other calls here in the meantime. Cheryl in Seattle. Hey, Cheryl, what's on your mind? And Joyce Nicholas is on line 4. Oh, sorry, Cheryl. I got to push the button. There we go.
Okay.
Now you're on the air.
There we go. Okay, so my daughter is a nurse in Wenatchee, and she came down with a fever yesterday, and they sent her home immediately, gave her a test, sent her home. The test came back negative for COVID this morning, and she was told as soon as her fever is 99 to get back to work on the front lines. So my 3 grandchildren have been sent over to this side of the mountains because she's worried that she might have to quarantine at home. But she's exhausted. They're running fevers just because their bodies are fighting to stay awake, to stay standing up. They're eating like crap. People are being very generous to send food to the hospitals, but it's crap. It's takeout. And so I worry for those professionals on the front line that they are not even getting the opportunity to keep their immune system bolstered so that they can stay at work and the ungodly hours they're being asked to do. So she totally expects to be back at work 24 hours after getting a COVID test. But she feels
well, at least she got the results back from the test in less than 12 days.
Yes, and she got to go home and sleep in her own bed instead of in the car, like a lot of these frontline people are doing. And now she's worrying because she's away from her kids, and her kids have to start online schooling, and it's a mess from the standpoint of we are not putting our resources into the people and processes that are going to make a difference.
Wow. Does she think that it's possible that it was a false negative or that she has the flu or something? And What's with the symptoms but not the test?
Right. They're just getting run down. They're not sleeping. They're not eating good, nutritious food. And so their bodies are just fighting to maintain their own stamina. It's just taking a toll on them. So they're running these low-grade fevers just because that's the body's natural way of, ramping up to fight infection. So at 99, a temperature of 99, they still want her back to the hospital.
Yeah, remarkable. Amy Vanderpool is blogging about her experience. She has COVID, or believes she has. She hasn't been able to get a test, but it's over at the Shero, SHERO. You'd have to just Google it, or Amy Vanderpool. It's fascinating what she's going through. Cheryl, thanks for the call. Jennifer in Stillwater, Minnesota. Hey, Jennifer, thanks for listening to AM 950. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I just have some facts that I wanted to share with your listeners. It came to my attention that yesterday on The View, Whoopi Goldberg went after Bernie. Bernie was at home on via Zoom doing an interview on The View, and Whoopi Goldberg attacked him. I'm sure people can watch it online, saying that he needs to drop out of the race and that there's no mathematical way for him to get the nomination. And so I, did a quick Google search. I went to Bloomberg News, and the most recent delegate count is Joe Biden, 1217, Bernie, 914. So there's a difference of only 303 between Joe and Bernie. And the total that you need of pledged delegates is 1991. So Bernie totally has a path. There are still 23 states that need to vote. 23 states. That's half the states still have not voted. So apparently the people on The View don't care about those people being disenfranchised. And I wanted to share it with your listeners.
I don't know about everybody else, but yeah.
Because the mainstream media does not report that there is still an election going on. I live right on the Wisconsin border here in Minnesota, and the primary in Wisconsin is on Tuesday, April 7th, and they are still having it. And I just think it's appalling that, we're in the middle of the worst pandemic, possibly in our history, certainly since 1918, and, we need single-payer Medicare for all. And nobody's even talking about how that's Bernie's plan. He's been trying to help America get it for his whole career. And, they won't even.
Jennifer, and I get it. Thank you very much. The other thing is that Wisconsin, Governor Tony Evers asked the legislature to authorize, a statewide mail-in ballot for the primary and to postpone the primary long enough to make that happen. And the Republicans in the legislature said, no, we're not going to do that. We know, as Paul Weyrich famously said back in 1980 when he was helping run the Reagan campaign, that frankly our leverage in the election goes up as the voting populace goes down. Speaking of Wisconsin, Dave in Goodman, Wisconsin. You're on the air, Dave.
The Wisconsin election, I got a thing to fill out for the absentee ballot last week. And I did, and I was going to send it. It said put a stamp on it and send it. But on the fine print on the bottom, it said, by the way, you have to have a copy of your driver's license. Well, if you don't have access to a copy machine, and then you have to put it in a different envelope, of course, to send both. Well, they don't, really make that clear to you. For me, I go to a real small polling station. I'll probably be the only one in there, so it's not a problem. But if you go to a bigger city, you're going to be close to people. I would encourage people to call the governor, everybody that they can, and encourage them to, and your state senator, whoever, and encourage them to call off this election for at least another month. Or if they're going to send out these absentee ballot things, make sure people know what to send in, because I'm sure people have sent those in already thinking they're going to get an absentee ballot, and they're going to come up short. So that's
crazy that you've got to send a copy of your driver's license. I mean, it says
right. It's really in the fine print on the bottom.
Yeah, I get it, Dave. It is harder to fake a signature than it is to fake a driver's license. It really is. And we've used biometrics signatures to verify people's identity in this country for 100 years, for probably 200 years. And for the Republicans, no. Hey, there's a lot of people who don't have copy machines in their house. I don't have a copy machine in my house. If I have to copy something, I take a picture on my phone and then I print it on my computer's printer. But a lot of people don't even have computer printers in their house. Probably the majority of people don't. But the Republicans, oh yeah, you want to vote by mail? Well, here's another obstacle for you. Absolutely frigging brilliant. Amazing. Bruce in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Bruce, what's on your mind?
A point of optimism. You just spoke about it, but Abbott Labs has developed a FDA-approved COVID-19 test cartridge that returns a result in 5 to 13 minutes that you talked about. Right. It runs on a standardized diagnostic platform, of which 18,000 are currently out and in service. And they're relatively small, portable, not too expensive, and that's what the Trump administration doesn't want to distribute where it's needed most. They also have another larger testing platform that they can couple with this that will run 1 million tests a week, and they feel that they can do 5 million tests a month. So I just thought I would pass that along.
Yeah.
So that gives me a little optimism. I know we can do. Go ahead.
Yeah. The bottom line of what we need here is testing. I mean, it's just that simple. And without a lot of this is why Germany is ahead of the curve. It's why Germany has such a lower death rate. It's because they actually know how many people are infected, because they've been testing people literally since January, just like South Korea has been. And South Korea has a really low death rate. You've got two countries that, well, more than two actually. Singapore did it and Taiwan did it as well. So you've got 4 countries that jumped ahead of everybody else back in January when they knew this thing was coming, while Donald Trump was going golfing and holding rallies and talking about a Democrat hoax. That's how absurd it all is. 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Meanwhile, after the New York Times calls him out for being responsible for part of this crisis, Sean Hannity is having a meltdown and thinking about suing the liberal media. Right. And welcome back. Joe in Seattle. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hello?
Joe, you are on the air. Hey. Okay, I'm going to put Joe on hold here, and we'll get back to Joe in a little bit. Harry in Aurora, Colorado. Hey, Harry, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching.
Hey, good morning, Tom. I want to thank you and your team, because the only place that I can get information that I think is reasonably reliable is from free speech. And I'm going to leave you in endowment. I'm 88, so it won't be too far down the road. What I wanted to say is I had heard on MSNBC, Ari Melber, I think his name is, one of the commentators. Mm-hmm. He said that AG Cover-Up Barr is perusing all of the arrest laws in the United States to see what they can change. And having spent 3 years in post-war Germany shortly after the war, I can tell you, my feeling is the brown shirts are the next move they're going to make.
Wow. God forbid, Harry. I mean, it's...
I know.
Did Barr give any... I missed that story. Did he give any rationalization? Did he indicate why?
No. There was very little information. It was just saying that Barr is looking at the laws regarding arresting citizens.
Wow. Yeah, cover up
I
General
thought
Barr.
you might have some... I thought you might have a little bit of information on that, but...
No, but now that you've sensitized me to it, I'll keep my eye out for it, Harry. In fact, I'll go looking for it after we get off the air. That's
I would appreciate that.
I've written several articles outing cover-up General Barr, and so I may well be in his crosshairs. I don't know. Harry, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. And I wish you well. Patrick in Long Island, New York. Hey, Patrick, we got a couple minutes. A minute and a half. What's up?
Hey, Tom. positive wishes, positive feelings towards the lady who had called earlier who was suffering with the illness and what have you. Yeah, I send that out for her. While I was watching the show, two quick questions occurred to me. Who's the Surgeon General? Nobody, right? And the other one.
No, we have a Surgeon General. I don't recall his name, but he's.
Where is he? Where's his?
He's the one who went on TV day before yesterday and said everybody in the country needs to shelter in place. And as a result of that, you had 3 or 4 red states that suddenly said, "Oh, really? Okay, we'll do it."
Okay, I missed his appearance. No, I missed his appearance. And the other thing was, when have you seen a poll rating Trump's response to the crisis? Obama or any other president, every day we'd be presented with shifting polls, numbers from in the morning from Quinnipiac and then in the evening from CNN.
I haven't seen any numbers in a couple of days. Patrick, by the way, it's Surgeon General Adams. Adams is his last name.
Thank you. And one last thing I want to say to you is, in your generation, as I am, I was vehemently opposed to the Vietnam War. The only any kind of solution I got was when Kissinger was a war criminal. Bush and Cheney should have been war criminals. I think Trump is building a case for criminally negligent homicide against him and his administration. That's it.
I think it's fairly obvious on its face. Patrick, thank you. Spot on. We'll be right back. Stick around. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these 3 guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Monty in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Hey, Monty, what's up?
Thanks so much for taking my call. I work at Fort Lauderdale here at a pharmacy, and one of my coworkers has tested positive for the coronavirus. So I'm going to self-quarantine. I started today. But here's my concern, Tom, is we ship drugs all over Florida, all over the country. I've called every Democratic representative, including our mayor here, who's been phenomenal. I spoke with a representative from Ted Deutsch, and they all said the same thing. They want to close everything down, but Governor Ron DeSantis is not allowing it. Actually, the mayor's office here was going to close down every business here, except obviously the groceries and stuff. And if there was an outbreak of coronavirus, they were going to close it down. The governor stepped in and said, absolutely not. They're being sued. We're going to see in Florida here is going to be so scary. It's mind-boggling. And one other point.
I thought he did the shutdown order yesterday, Monty.
He did the shutdown, but there are still people out. The supermarkets are here. No one in the supermarket is wearing gloves or masks. Not that helps a great deal, but it is a preventative. And here's the thing, Tom. Everyone that I've contacted, both whether it's DeSantis, whether it's Rick Scott, or the Democratic leaders, which I'm a Democrat, but I'm trying to reach out to everyone, the only one who's gotten back to me is every Democratic leader, including the mayor here, who personally called me when I told them of this. So it's amazing that the Republicans are ignoring what's going on, and the Democratic leaders here are reaching out to me on an hourly basis because they're concerned as I am, that we ship these drugs all over Florida, and we don't know how long the virus lasts on cardboard, on surfaces. If we ship a drug to someone and they get infected, it could be a total disaster here.
Yeah, I got my medication a while ago by mail, a week or two ago, and without going into all the details, from my pharmacy, and operating on the assumption that pharmacists are frontline people, just like doctors and nurses. People are sick, they go into the pharmacy, if just to buy cold medication, but they may well have COVID and not realize it with a mild case. And so I'm operating on the assumption that a lot of pharmacists have been exposed. And so when I got that package in the mail, first of all, I set it aside for 3 or 4 days because apparently the virus can last on paper and cardboard surfaces just a day or two. But there was tape on the outside, and the tape is plastic, and it can last on plastic for, I've heard, as little as 3 and as much as 7 days. So I set it aside for almost a week and then wiped it down with a Clorox wipe, opened the package, took out the pill bottles, wiped down the pill bottles, and set them aside. And fortunately, these are medications that I won't need to use for another couple of weeks because I have an old supply. And I'm guessing that even if the pills were individually handled by hand by the pharmacist, that if there's virus on them, they will be virus-free within a week or two. So that's what I'm doing. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
No, I do that for my groceries, and anytime when I come into my home, I take my shoes off, I shower, I do everything I can. But my question to you is, Tom, what I don't understand the political gain here for Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis. When people are dying and millions are getting sick, how does that help them? It's almost as if, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, it's almost as if they want this is a red state. Shouldn't DeSantis want people alive? I understand what Trump is doing to the blue states. I don't agree with it. Obviously, it's a genocide of some kind. But what advantage does Ron DeSantis get showing how incompetent he is?
The most extreme conspiracy theory that I've heard to answer that question, and I don't subscribe to it, but I don't dismiss it, is that Donald Trump has concluded that the only way he can get himself reelected is if he is the equivalent of FDR. If he's the head of the ship of state when the state is in a multi-generational crisis, a crisis of unprecedented performance. Because when the country is going through something like that, like we went through World War I, well, actually we didn't go through World War I during an election. Woodrow Wilson got reelected on keeping us out of the war, but FDR, getting reelected. That when the country, well, actually that was afterwards too, but in any case, that when the country's in a crisis, people are more likely to say, stay the course, keep the current leadership. So if Trump can get his act together in the next couple of months to look presidential, which he's trying to do every day with his reality show on TV, then the worse things get, the more likely people are to reelect him. That's that conspiracy theory. Beyond that, I think that, personally, I think what's going on is that Trump never took the science seriously. He lied and he BS'd about it because he didn't understand it and therefore didn't take it seriously. And he runs an autocratic regime where if you don't agree with dear leader, you're out on your keister. Remember, there was that one doctor who was in his administration. She was Rod Rosenstein's sister. And she was saying, wait a minute, this is going to get bad. We need to shut down the country. And he fired her. So he was trying to keep the stock market up. He was trying to keep the economy going. He didn't understand the science. And all these people like Ron DeSantis, they're all watching Fox News. That's their exclusive source of news for many of these Republicans, including the governors. Obviously, Brian Kemp, if he had no clue until yesterday, he's only been watching Fox News. And so I think that they're just going along to go along because that's what they do. They say Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. My personal opinion is that that's what we're seeing. That Trump set the tone with his lies and his BS, and these guys just fell into line behind him, not realizing that they were going to be responsible for killing thousands, maybe millions of Americans. Monty, thanks for the call. Great one. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hello, Progressive Voices tune-in listeners.
We say fight back!
We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, you know, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, you know, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war? How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred? How to win it, if such a thing is even possible. This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't, that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large.
This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb. Reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation and Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, I got an early copy of Stealing Our Democracy, How the Political Assassination of a Governor Threatens Our Nation by former Governor Don Siegelman, political prisoner number 1. It's available for pre-order, I'm sure, and wherever you find books. It's absolutely an amazing story. And the last Democratic governor of Alabama, 1999 to 2003, Don Siegelman, he was the lieutenant governor from 1995 to 99. He was the attorney general from 87 to 91, secretary of state from 79 to 87. This is a guy who knows politics. They were talking about him in 2002, 2003 as a potential Democratic nominee for the 2004 presidential run. And then he got in Karl Rove's sights. He challenged the machine, the Bush machine, and Karl Rove, who used to live in Alabama, took him down, sent him off to prison. And it's an amazing, amazing story. And on the line with us right now is Governor Don Siegelman. Don, welcome back to the program. It's been a while.
Oh, Tom, thank you. I'm glad to be back. I was listening to your show. I presume your listeners heard you reading about the witches earlier. And if they did...
Only some of them did, Don.
What's that?
Yeah, our commercial that's just Phil that goes over the air on our non-commercial stations. Our commercial stations are hearing their local stations, so a lot of people don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I hope everybody. Anyway, my point is, everybody needs to register and vote. A lot of us are going to be having to vote absentee ballots, but whether it's absentee ballots or whether we get to vote in person, we need to. Get in line, stay in line, demand an absentee ballot, demand to vote, and vote in this upcoming election.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you about Oakdale Federal Prison, where you lived for 5 years, or where you were incarcerated for 5 years. First of all, how did you end up in jail for 5 years after 100 federal attorneys, state attorneys general, said what you did was not a crime? What happened?
Well, was targeted because I was the one Democrat that Republicans couldn't beat fair and square. I won re-election in 2002 only to have the vote changed overnight by Karl Rove's client. Well, Karl Rove's client seized the ballots, refused to let me have a recount, which forced me to concede the election to my Republican. I made a pledge to come back and run again in 2006. It was at a time when Jeff Sessions was interested in running for governor, and it was his retired FBI agent, Sessions, who, of course, Trump appointed as Attorney General, had been U.S. Attorney in Alabama, and it was his retired agents who built the case against me, at first in 2004 and then again in 2006. The prosecutor was vetted by Karl Rove, and the Attorney General who started the investigation was Karl Rove's client. The U.S. prosecutor who brought me to trial 1 month before the election, her husband was managing my opponent's campaign, and he was also Karl Rove's business partner, political partner in Alabama. I could go on. Jack Abramoff, who was Karl Rove's bagman, brought in $20 million from the Indian casinos across the Mississippi, just right next door, and they funneled that money into various organizations to bring me down. The judge was vetted by Karl Rove. Anyway, you get the story, get the picture.
Yeah, it's all in the book, and people really need to get this book, "Stealing Our Democracy" by Don Siegelman. Let's talk about Oakdale, if you don't mind. It seems like it's an epicenter for the coronavirus. What's the latest out of there? I'm guessing you're still in touch with people that you met there, that you knew there, and you're certainly paying attention to it.
I do get almost daily reports, usually through a third party, and they are expecting things to get worse. They're putting up a military-style tent on one of the prison grounds. According to the inmates, an entire dorm of 200 people have been quarantined. They're starting to take the temperature of, it's a little late, but starting to take the temperature of prison guards as they enter the prison. There's a whole wing in the hospital located in Alexandria, Louisiana, that's devoted to prison inmates. The situation is grim because it was grim before the virus. Inmates are stacked one on top of each other in bunk beds, sometimes three deep instead of just two bunk beds, one on top of the other. There's a third bunk bed on top of that. They're placed so close together you can actually reach out and touch the other bed when you're lying down. So it's an environment that's made to perpetuate a virus, and there's no protective shields or any way to prevent inmates from breathing in what's exhaled from another prisoner.
NPR this morning was reporting that only 9 inmates there have tested positive, 32 have symptoms, 64 have been exposed, 15 inmates hospitalized, 8 staff members testing positive. This suggests to me, if they're not testing every single person in that prison, that entire prison is going to just burn through that prison in short order. What can Americans do who are concerned about our brothers and sisters who are in prison all across the United States? Don?
Well, I think the most important thing is to do what I've been doing and writing and calling, texting and emailing members of the House and Senate Judiciary Committee. They have been active. They are working. Gerald Nadler is on top of it. But I think that the more people who express a concern about it, the more will be done. But the problem is that this is this is like shooting fish in a barrel for the virus. I mean, these people can't move. There's no place for them to be sequestered or isolated or quarantined where there's no way for them to maintain social distancing, even when they are laying in.
So we need to get people out of these jails now, right? I mean, isn't that a really important? We just have a minute until we're going to hit a hard break here. But isn't that a really important part of it, particularly in parts of the country where the virus hasn't spread through the entire prison population? Get those people out of jail.
Absolutely, nonviolent inmates who are in there for some petty crime ought to be released, put on home confinement. They've got electronic monitoring. This stuff could be, you could make a big difference in that way.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise we're going to have hospitals turning into massive morgues. I mean, and then on top of that, I'm thinking about all these children and young people who are being held in cages in concentration camps being run by ICE around the country. They're in the same boat, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an incredibly dangerous situation. And, for those of us who are isolated, quarantined at home, you can walk to the refrigerator or go outside, but these people can't move. Yeah, it's a very, very bad situation. Former Alabama Governor Don Siegelman, his new book, Stealing Our Democracy, How the Political Assassination of a Governor Threatens Our Nation, and it really does. I've blurbed the book. It's brilliant. You need to get it. Don Siegelman, thanks for being with us, Don. Absolutely. Thank you, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We will be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back, Barbara in Albany, Oregon. Hey, Barbara, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was wondering if you had filled out your census yet.
I have not. I got it in the mail. I'm going to fill it out online, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. Why?
Well, I filled mine out online yesterday, and afterwards, I felt that I'd been completely assaulted. It was very racist in so many ways. And I don't remember, I did census 10 years ago, and I don't remember anything like that being included in it. And it was all about race, and not only if you were white, if you were white Muslim, or, just all of this is such an assault on sensibilities to even fill out the census.
Barbara, it wasn't saying to you things like people of a particular race are not as smart or something like that. What the census is used for is to determine where there is need in the United States. If there is a federal program, for example, that's going to support Native Americans, you want to know where the Native Americans are. If there's a program that's going to support Hispanic Americans, if there are programs to help out, ultimately maybe even reparations, something like that, people who are ancestors of slaves. We need to know those things. That's why the census is asking those questions. And the census has been asking questions about race for at least 100 years. I mean, the census has been going on since the founding of the Republic. I wouldn't be surprised if it's been asking questions about race since the census of 1790. It's done every 10 years, every year that ends in zero. And that's not racist. That is determining, because of this country's racist legacy, you got individual minority groups that are suffering under, in some cases, unique circumstances that can be remedied, whether it's educational or whether it's, whatever it may be, work, housing. People who for years and years have been the victims of redlining, employment discrimination, crappy schools as a consequence of their race. We need to know who those folks are and where they are, and that's why it's asking those questions. There's nothing racist about it, Barbara. It's racial, but it's not racist.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up for me, Tom. And
You're welcome.
You for having Don Siegelman on. That was very it's good to hear from him. Thank you so much. All right, goodbye.
Thank you, Barbara. I got her on. Thank you. Sarah in Tarzana, California. Hey, Sarah, what's up?
Well, two quick things. Number one, I want to give a shout-out of gratitude to my former Congresswoman, Karen Bass. I see her on TV a lot now. And to the one district over from where I used to live, Maxine Waters. I've met the woman. She is a seriously class act, and I can't thank her enough for all the stuff she's doing. And then my other concern is I don't want to see Trump give his filthy rich friends who don't need another nickel, whose grandchildren's grandchildren aren't going to need another nickel, and I want to make sure that they don't get a dime until people like me who are on a very small pension get some more money. I mean, I was a substitute teacher in LA for 30 years. That's poverty. My family has to support me in the nursing home I'm in. And so I'd like to make sure that this distribution is fair.
I'm with you, Sarah, and the Democrats are doing everything they can to make that happen, while the Republicans are doing everything they can to make sure that billionaires get more tax cuts and the big corporations get subsidies. This is why Trump is meeting with all these fossil fuel executives on Friday. We just have to contact our elected representatives. Sarah, thanks for the call. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Bob in Westminster, Colorado. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
How you doing? I wanted to share with you the consequences of the virus, the environmental consequences. And there's things being put on YouTube of all the animals returning to the cities, like the fish in the canals and the wild boar in some parts of the country and different places. They have
coyotes walking around Manhattan.
Back in. Pardon?
Yeah, I think Sean needs to pop my mic up because people can't. But yeah, they've got coyotes running around Manhattan. I mean, it's incredible, Bob.
Well, here's the other thing too. Just two other things real quick. Number one is I live in Westminster, Colorado, near about 3/4 of a mile from US 36, which has 200,000 cars a day. And at night, just how quiet it's become, and just an airport near us, and plus DIA, how much the quieter the skies are. And it's just amazing. But at my house, I've been here 42 years now, I have a heron who's been fishing my pond that I've had to fence off, and last year I had 2 ducks in it. It's only a little 8 by 10. You can't even see anywhere. And then I have rabbits and squirrels, and we had a bald eagles flying over our house the other day, and we have hawks almost all the time. And there's a white hawk that lives up about a couple of miles from here that actually somebody told me they saw it on my porch last year. It had caught something and was flying off. So, I mean, I have a wildlife zoo here, you know. And the other thing, finally,
that's great, Bob.
There was a program a few years ago called Zoo, where the animals had all gotten the virus and began attacking humans all over the planet. And these guys were trying to sort out what was going on and trying to find a cure for the virus to fix these animals. And the humans had to go into compounds to protect themselves. Anyway, I just
fascinating. Bob, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for telling us what you're grateful for. That nature is coming back. Louise and I live on basically the glide path for the Portland airport, and the skies are really quiet, and we can see the freeway from here, Route 5 from our house, and it is it's looking like Sunday morning. Anyhow, Dennis in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Hey, yeah, Tom, I love your show. I'm calling in to talk about what I see as discrimination against seniors. We have in North Carolina, Texas, other states, governors saying we have to enforce these rules about social distancing and small groups, smaller than groups of 10, except we're going to give an exemption to churches. And they have no right.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
They're not frontline people. They're not medicals. No. They're not doctors. They're not lawyers. They're not policemen. They're and it puts us the elderly, the retired. We are the ones who are greatest at risk, and it directly impacts us. And I called AARP. they said, call my North Carolina representative, ARP. And that person always said, sounds like you got a good point. And so I'm using your national forum and your good listeners to maybe call their AARP representatives, their state at their state office, and ask them to contact, if they're in Texas or any of these states, and tell them use their political action capabilities, that they have, to institute some common sense here.
Yeah, I am with you, Dennis. You're in North Carolina. This is the same is true in Florida, where Ron DeSantis said, okay, we're going to shut the state down, except for the churches. If you want to go to church, you want to go to one of the mega churches who are the big donors to my campaigns, then feel free. And he's killing off his own peeps. I mean, it's just insane. Dennis, thank you for the call. Donna in Yachats, Oregon. Am I saying that right, Donna?
No, you're not, and I was testing you. It's Yachats. It's the central Oregon coast between Newport and Florence.
Great. Thank you. What's up?
So first of all, I love you. And I wanted to tell you, in January I might have called and to tell you about what's going on in Cuba because I was just there with some donations. But now it's a different subject. And I wrote to a friend and I said, what are you guys doing in Cuba with this virus? And I wrote down some notes with his response. And he said, maybe the government didn't act as fast as it could have, but now the whole country's on shutdown, and people are making masks at home, and because they have poor local transportation and lack of private cars for a lot of people, they're not escaping anywhere like people would escape to, like, the coast or Spring Fling, and no one's trying to escape, and he says that they can't really stockpile things because they just don't have enough things to go around. And, personally, when I was last there in January, so many people depended on Airbnb to, make some extra money or little tiny local restaurants, and business is just dead, and I fear for them. And I just wanted to convey that.
Yeah, there's an old saying that, when it rains, the poor get wetter. When it's cold, the poor get colder. When it's hot, the poor get hotter. Cuba has been impoverished by over 50 years of U.S. embargoes, which are unconscionable, in my opinion, and stupid. We have never successfully flipped a government with embargoes, but we're doing it to Venezuela, we're doing it to Cuba, we're doing it to Iran, and presumably other countries around the world, maybe Myanmar, I'm not sure. But Louise and I were in Cuba a year ago, March, and it was just a beautiful country and extraordinary stuff going on there. And their major export is doctors, for goodness sake. Which is not to say that I'm a big fan of governments that don't allow free speech. But, there are many, many good lessons we can learn from Cuba. And they were starting to come out of that as a result of American tourists going down there. And then Trump shut that door. Obama had opened the door and Trump closed it. It was just wrong. Donna, thanks for the call. And thanks for the pronunciation for a new town in Oregon. We'll be back.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So Kellyanne Conway's husband has come out swinging at Donald. Old George has a story to tell. I'll tell you about that after the break. We'll pick up the rest of your calls.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater white shirt and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone and of his own accord would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color, As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, why did Trump delay? America deserves an answer. Professor Richard Wolff is here on his thoughts on the new coronavirus economy, the stimulus, and the 3.3 million people being laid off. Public Citizen's Peter May-Barduk has a warning to pandemic profiteers, and Chief Washington analyst with the DC radio company, Victoria Jones, drops by to talk about COVID-19, UK, Boris v. Trump, and others. Stay tuned. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live from Portland. The Army, if you've missed our first hour, the Army warned the Trump administration on February 3rd that 150,000 Americans could die from this virus if they didn't do something quickly. They didn't do something quickly. And now the Trump administration is saying 150,000 Americans are going to die. Let that sink in. I started the program by asking if you had things that you were grateful for, or you had, or that you were hopeful about. The positive side, of a bad situation. Making the best of a bad situation, right? What do you have? And Louise found this. This is one of the. There's a little website for people who live in Portland, people who talk to each other, and it's things like that. And this one is from a person over in St. John's, which is a neighborhood here in Portland. And she says, "Hi, neighbors. Before you criticize me or yell at me, please know I'm taking this situation seriously and taking every precaution I can to keep everyone safe. I care for a senior, so I do not see any people except my partner. And when I walk, I wear gloves and I place a flyer on their door and step away from the door over 6 feet until they come to the door and I ask if they need anything." Now that, kind of sounds confusing. Let me explain it. She says, "I was thinking that many seniors that might not be on this website or use online resources, I've seen posts from people offering to help and some with no responsive needs. So I started walking my neighborhood every day, looking for people 70 and older and knocking on their door, leaving a flyer to see if they need anything. If you're willing to help with any requests, please message me at," and then there's her phone number and her email address. And she says, "For the most part, people have been fine, but I tell them they can call anytime since this could go on for a long time. One veteran said he can't leave home anymore and needed a thermometer, a mask, and some hand sanitizer. I already have these, and I'm also limited store trips. So I'm just asking if you want to be on my list to reach out to when I find people that need things. No pressure. Also wondering if anyone in the neighborhood is making masks. I can buy some or reimburse for costs and maybe hand them out to seniors who can still get out and shop but need protection." Isn't that sweet? That's the upside. The downside is, I told you yesterday about how on Tuesday afternoon I went for a walk along this path along the Columbia River here. And, everybody tries to get 6 feet away from each other. I mean, everybody's been really good about that, except this one guy who looks like he's probably in his mid-60s and he's kind of curmudgeonly. I just kind of imagine he looks like somebody who watches Fox News all the time. And he just walks right down the middle of the path, and he did that Tuesday. And then Louise and I went for a walk yesterday, and, we were trying to get over to the side of the path and get out of the way. He was on the side with the grass. We were on the side where we'd fall into the river. And he didn't move. He wouldn't move. He just right down the middle of the path, like, screw you guys. I watch Fox News. I know this is a scam. I know this is just a hoax. It's so sad. And then the story over on Raw Story today, the headline, "Many conservatives want to own the libs during the pandemic, even if it gets people killed." And that's a phrase not from some liberal website. It's from Frank Luntz, the Republican pollster. And he's saying to his Republican colleagues, back off a little bit here. You're going to get people killed. Well, they're already getting people killed. They have been for 2 months now, saying that this is a hoax and that it's nonsense and that it's going to go away and it's just like the flu. All lies, demonstrable lies. They knew these things were lies. Trump knew they were lies. Trump was warned by the Army on February 3rd. Trump was warned by our spy agencies back in late December that this was coming to the United States. And last night, Trump was saying, oh, don't worry, you're going to get 100,000 ventilators. I promise it. Right. Well, Politico did an investigation and found that there are 9,500 ventilators in the national stockpile, and 3,200 more are expected by April 13th. The 100,000 that Trump promised, they will be available in late June. Just in time for the red states. You know, the virus is a couple months behind. It's hitting hard and fast in the cities, like here in Portland. But actually, you know, we went into shutdown, the entire state of Oregon, weeks ago. And it looks like we flattened the curve, although who knows. Same with Washington State, just north of us. Although we did have a couple of deaths overnight last night, and we're up to, I think, 730 some odd cases, known cases in Portland. We're having a real hard time getting testing kits. You know, of course, because we're a blue state. And so the Trump administration doesn't send us squat. But anyway, Damon in Las Vegas. Hey, Damon, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Yeah, this is kind of an old story, but I haven't heard you do anything about it, so I thought I'd bring it back up. One thing before I tell my story, the guy who talked about the churches, I remember reading in Stephen King's book, The Stand, and I'm paraphrasing, but something to the effect, more people died in churches than anywhere else. Okay.
Or at the hands of churches, yes. I mean,
So
see
anyway-
Crusades, right?
So again, I'm sorry?
Yeah, I said see the Crusades, you know, yes. And the Catholic Protestant wars in Ireland and well, across the continent for 500 years. Yeah, I'm with you. But that's not what you called about, Damon. What's up?
Okay, so that you call it the $500 billion slush fund, but it's actually a $4.5 billion slush fund because they changed the laws or tweaked it when they did the whatever to make the $500 billion leverageable by 5. So every dollar they added to the slush fund, they can leverage that $5 into $5.
Yeah, the Fed can. The Fed can. I read an article about this in the Financial Times last week. Congressman Pocan was on Wednesday saying that it's only a $2 billion bailout. It's not a $5 billion bailout. I didn't want to contradict him on the air because I don't understand well enough how this works, and I need to educate myself. But my understanding is that the Fed has got basically a $4 trillion slush fund pool that they can loan directly to corporations so they can use to buy corporate bonds, which is functionally the same thing as loaning directly to corporations. And they needed to be backstopped. Yeah, and they needed to be backstopped by a certain amount of Treasury money to do that, and that amount was $500 billion. I will learn. Damon, I'll do my best to learn all the details of this and get back with you all on this tomorrow. Alan in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Alan, what's up?
Hey, well, my last day of work was March 15th. I work in entertainment and audiovisual, and the problem is the Washington, Oregon locked down early, and we're on the leading edge of the cusp here. But states that are just finally locking down, I mean, 1-2 months maybe, but we deal with people coming in from out of town, conventions, shows, traveling shows. If these people come in and we've loosened our restrictions, I'm 67. I'm in the risk pool.
The risk group.
I can't go back to work until every virus, every state has locked down and we've controlled this virus. So it ain't going to be 1 or 2 months. It's going to be a year.
I agree. I think what we're going to see is probably toward the end of the summer, you're going to see the economy starting to recover because there will be enough people who have been infected and survived and are now immune that they will be, highly employable. They will have opportunities in the workforce. I did a whole riff about this on Monday, I believe, about how George Washington, because he had smallpox and he had a badly disfigured face as a result of it, he had smallpox scars all over his face. They don't show up in the paintings because the painters always painted those out. But that was the thing that allowed him to rise rapidly through the ranks to the rank of colonel through the British Army, because they knew that he was immune to the diseases. Alan, thanks for the call. Phil in Brookings, South Dakota. Hey, Phil, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I'd like your opinion on what you think the payroll deduction tax will. How do you think that'll affect Social Security? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, the way it's written, it's a suspension, but there are enough loopholes in it that a lot of us are very concerned about this. Congressman Pocan on Wednesday brought this up, and he said in the next bill, they're going to nail that down so that the Republicans can't use it as a way of damaging the Social Security Trust Fund, because they have every confidence that that's exactly what the Republicans are going to do. Hope that helps. Bob in Desert Hot Springs, California. A minute to the break. Bob, what's up?
Yes, Tom. My question is, do you think Bernie Sanders is a more viable candidate due to the coronavirus and the lack of, the prolonged voting and his whole new Green Deal?
I don't know, Bob. Certainly his Medicare for All proposals are making more sense in an era of a pandemic than they did, to people who didn't understand them in an era when there wasn't a pandemic. There's some. He's got some serious political headwinds, particularly coming out of the mainstream of the Democratic Party. But we'll see. We'll see. I would never write anybody off until the last vote is taken. He's only 300 votes behind, out of about 2,000 cast so far, a little over 2,000 cast, and they still have a ways to go. So, we'll see where it shakes out. Bob, thanks for the call, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. Speaking the truth to the multinational corporations and these hustlers who are scamming us on medical equipment we'd rather you really didn't know all about.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives. This is about.
And keep an eye out for emails saying that they'll help you file for your $1,200 or they'll help you get a small business loan. These are thieves. They want to rob you. And welcome back. Russ in Portland. Hey, Russ. Thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Yeah, Tom, have you heard of Project Aura? Do you know about that?
Yes. It was the $3,200 ventilators that the federal government ordered back in September of last year, and the company, got ready to produce them. They produced a couple working prototypes, and then the company got bought out by a bigger company. They got bought out by a hedge fund or whatever, a private vulture capital company, and they quit making them. And that company now is trying to sell $15,000 ventilators to us. Yeah, I did the story on the air yesterday or the day before.
Oh, good. Well, the point is that when you have corruption in the financial services industry, as Elizabeth Warren tried to point out, you get theft. But when you have corruption in the medical device industry, which is what this is, and it also involves corruption of the Federal Trade Commission, you get death. And because Project Aura was snuffed by Covidin, was the company that bought out Newport Medical Instruments. Because the project was killed by COVID and because they didn't want to compete with a $3,000 ventilator that was going to come out of this public-private partnership, tens of thousands of Americans are going to die hideous death by asphyxiation. This was not necessary. They were going to have 70,000 of these cheap, effective, simple-to-operate ventilators in the national inventory. Would have happened, but COVID and their executives stepped in and killed it, with the blessing of the Federal Trade Commission, which has been co-opted by corporate America. And these people do not have blood on their hands. They are covered in blood. Yeah, and Covidin, what an ironic name for a company that made the COVID virus, the COVID-19 epidemic worse. Yeah, spot on, Russ. I share your outrage, and like I said, I went off on it at some length a couple days ago. Thank you for bringing it back up, though, Russ. I appreciate the call. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I've got a kind of a complex thing with a few names in here. It's about election fraud, and what I did with my time, I had time to watch a documentary called Kill Chain: Cyber War on Elections, and it was fantastic. And in that, there was a mention of a ES&S out of Omaha, Nebraska, that's located on John Galt Boulevard. You're familiar with John Galt is, a Ayn Rand novel.
He was the hero of Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, yeah.
Right, Going Galt. It's so the thing. Yeah. If you look at and this thing was fantastic. I mean, they invited some of the domestic hackers to come to Las Vegas and take a look at these machines, and they hacked these machines without ever being in the close to them.
You had 14-year-olds hacking these machines in less than 15 minutes. Yes, I know.
Yeah. So the thing is that the Democrats they have to know about this. I mean,
they do.
This election fraud is. We have to do something.
The problem is that the elections are run at the state level by state officials, and in those states where you've got Republican control, you're going to continue having hackable voting machines, Randy. Randy, I'm sorry we're out of time here, but yeah, we do need to get the word out. We need to share it with people, and people need to raise holy hell about it because, we've got to have reasonable elections. But in a way, the whole voting machine debate is becoming moot. Because if the entire country doesn't move to vote by mail right away, we are in deep trouble. We'll be right back. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. You were talking about the positive side, and David Byrne, of the Talking Heads, has a website, reasonstobecheerful.world, and it's pretty much like a magazine, part therapy session, and part like blueprint for a better world, and where people talk about solvable and replicable solutions. And I can think of some things myself after this whole thing's over. One, that people will be washing their hands, and they'll be less likely of another pandemic being as bad. And number 2, this is nothing compared to like a hemorrhagic virus. If that had hit us, it would be pretty bad. But at least now we'll have some preparation and know what to do for the next bigger one. So, that's what I thought were positive things to come out of it.
Yeah, those are, and I keep, saying, I think a lot of good is going to come out of this tragedy, as is often the case. And the main thing is that the whole BS story of Reaganomics, neoliberal economics, has been exposed for the fraud that it is. And I think that's a really, really good thing, too. So I'm happy about that.
Right, and I think it's going to force a lot more humans to be humane when they're exposed to this type of a situation. So that
it's bringing out the essential humanity. I mean, the story of this woman in our neighborhood who is soliciting help from neighbors to help out seniors in a way that is safe, that is sterile. It's brilliant. Bill, thanks for the call, and thanks for listening to SiriusXM. Gary in Felton, Delaware. Hey, Gary, what's up?
How you doing, Tom?
Good.
Yeah, I was just wanting to tell you, we're supposed to be on like a lockdown, stay inside here in Delaware. But, nobody here in Delaware is taking it serious. If you walk, if they see you wearing a mask or anything, they look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah.
I'm looking right across the street here, and I see people putting in sewer systems. There's about 10 people putting shingles on the roof, and cars flying up and down the road, and I'm like, don't nobody watch the news anymore?
Apparently not. There is a reckoning coming, Gary. Yeah, there is an absolute reckoning coming. Yeah. Gary, thank you for the call. Ed in Des Moines, Iowa. Hey, Ed, what's up?
Well, good morning, Tom. I was just, first off, the things that I'm thankful for, I suppose, is Dr. Fauci and President Como. And then I was wondering if you could comment on the veracity of a couple of websites that I've seen that say that China has reopened their wet markets.
I heard that from somebody who I know who is Chinese, who grew up in China, left China maybe 20 years ago and came to the United States, is now a U.S. citizen, but reads the Chinese websites and said that she's seen that reported. I don't have firm corroboration for that. I hope it's not the case. Because if it is, get ready. There's more of these zoonotic diseases out there. Ed, thanks for the call. Tucker in Berlin, Pennsylvania. Hey, Tucker, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. First time, long time.
Thank you.
Good. I read on Axios or CNN that Google lifted the ban on political ads mentioning the coronavirus.
Oh, good. Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, I heard you mention it, so I thought I'd let you know.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I was behind the curve. You're welcome. Thank you, Tucker. I appreciate the call. Beverly in Dixon, California. Got a quick one, Beverly?
Yes, I do. I heard on the local news this morning, I live close to the capital, Sacramento. I heard on the local news that in Sacramento County, 1/3 of the coronavirus cases have been traced back to attendance at church gatherings. So the people in Florida should know that the virus is not afraid of entering a church. It's a small sample. It's just for that county. However, I think it's indicative of what the people in Florida are going to face if DeSantis doesn't do something.
That's remarkable. Beverly, if you can find a news story to that effect, a local news story or anything like that, can you tweet it to me?
No, what happens is I live in the country, and there's no internet service out here, and the library where I go to get on the internet, they're all closed. So
okay, well, I'll make a note. I'll go looking for it. Beverly, I got to run, but thank you. I'll go looking for it. John in Apple Valley, California. You get the last minute, John. What's up?
Well, I was just wondering. Hello, Tom. I was just wondering if there are any studies that compare the population of the community that gets the virus versus the healthcare workers, because I'm wondering about the dosage effect. Thinking that the healthcare workers would get a much higher dose of the virus, being as they were dealing with people that were quite sick. And that might give us an idea of how infectious the virus really is, because we still don't know how much of it is in the community because we don't have the test. Right. And it might be that it's not as infectious as we really think.
Well, or it might be that it's a hell of a lot more infectious than we think, and that's why it's burning through country after country. No, I haven't seen any studies like that, John, and to answer your question. But I do know that something like 26%, I believe, of all the people who are sick in Spain right now, perhaps it's Italy, I'm pretty sure it's Spain, are healthcare workers. It's just burning through the healthcare working community. And it's going to happen in New York. It is happening in New York right now, too. The healthcare workers are falling. It's really, really tough, and all because Trump screwed this up so badly. We'll see you tomorrow. In the meantime, get out there, get active, or do it from your computer. Tag You're It. We'll see
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Bye.